The Drey Dossier, the original Larry Ellison series. This will be parts 4, 5 and 6. Thanks again, Drey. You've done all the hard work. I'm kind of pinching it. But I'm not plagiarising it. I don't do that. This is all Drey. This is all Drey. She's a good girl. Mac. Check her out, the Drey Dossier. The Drey, D-R-E-Y, Dossier. Okay, D-O-S-S-I-E-R, Dossier. Yeah, I know, it's spelled different how it sounds. Probably a little bit French, no? The Dossier. Bro, quoi de dire, popo? Bam.
TikTok. Tom Cruise's flight jacket from Top Gun Maverick when the Taiwanese flag mysteriously vanishes from earlier cuts. 4 completely different stories, right? Wrong. Because when you line up all the paperwork, the lawsuits, the timing, they all trace back to one single man. And that man is Larry Ellison. And what he just pulled off in Hollywood is the most sophisticated media coup I have ever seen. Now, this is part 4A of my series, Who the F Am I Working For? The full investigation is available on my Substack, The Drey Dossier. The link is in my bio. And look, I just want to say that I know a lot of what we talk about is heavy. You know, I see a lot of you in the comment section saying things like that you're feeling scared and that you don't know what to do with this information. And I don't want to just drop an existential crisis on you and run. Like, that's not who I want to be in your life. And so that's why I launched the Rough Riders, named after Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders. It's a private chat on Substack where we can process this kind of information together. Because I spiral about this stuff all the time. It's going to be $5 a month, but that's just because that's Substack's minimum. I wanted to make it $3 a month just to keep the trolls out, but I promise I'm going to make it worth it. It's going to be so much fun. I'm going to release timelines, research docs, maps, whatever you guys need to feel like you're not drowning in this alone. Because I know that this is all scary, but we're stronger when we're in this together, and we're stronger when we have knowledge. So don't shy away from the knowledge. Yes. Now, into the juicy stuff. So I've spent years working in Hollywood, and Hollywood has spent years laying me off. That's the churn. One quarter, you're out on a studio lot, and the next, you're freelancing, waiting for calls that never come. And that's become the new normal. But what is happening right now is anything but normal. This isn't about ratings or budgets. These mergers and consolidations are about ownership. And when you see 2 of the biggest voices in late night disappear within months of each other, right as their networks need the government to approve these massive deals, then it looks less like a coincidence and more like coordination. In order to fully appreciate what's happened to Jimmy Kimmel, we've got to go back to Colbert. Stephen Colbert hosts The Late Show on CBS. CBS is owned by Paramount Pictures, and Larry Ellison's son, David, just bought Paramount Pictures with billions of his dad's dollars. But in order to make that merger go through legally, they needed approval from the FCC. And that's when I noticed something very peculiar about the FCC filings with Paramount Pictures, because on October 29th, 2024, Paramount had refiled merger paperwork. Up until that point, they had Larry Ellison's name everywhere. Through 3 different shell companies called Pinnacle Media, he had controlled 77.5% of the deal. And then suddenly it shifts. David Ellison is now listed as holding 100% of the voting rights for the company. Larry is still bankrolling 3/4 of this purchase, but on paper, he's just the backer now, right? The money stayed, but what disappeared is Larry's direct accountability. The very next day, on October 30th, Trump sues CBS. He files a lawsuit for $10 billion against CBS. He doesn't do it in New York. He doesn't do it in Washington, D.C. He does it in Amarillo, Texas, a single-judge division where nearly every case lands with Matthew Kacsmaryk, a Trump-appointed judge who's ruled reliably in his favor, including in attempts to ban abortion nationwide. So Tuesday, Larry's name comes off the paperwork, and Wednesday, Trump files a lawsuit against the company that Larry's trying to buy in the friendliest court in America. I mean, call it a coincidence, but if you ask me, that's Larry getting his fingerprints off the gun before the shooting starts. Like, they could have at least tried to be subtle. There's a lot of language buried in those filings, right? But the one that stood out to me and that I need you to make note of is the fact that Paramount had pledged that if this merger was approved, they were going to strengthen local news. Now think about that for a second, because local news is a part of cable, and cable doesn't really generate a profit like streaming or blockbusters do, but politically it is gold. It's part of the most trusted news sources in America, and it shapes a lot of the swing state voters. And then 3 weeks later, FCC Chairman Brendan Carr goes on to Fox News and says the quiet part out loud, that Trump's lawsuit will affect the merger review. That's right, the regulator himself tied a political lawsuit to whether Paramount is allowed to get sold or not. And then from there...
Quick disclaimer before we go on. You'll notice, unlike Whitney Webb, this isn't all off the dome as if she wrote it. Because I think Whitney Webb is a master... She's an architect. I think Whitney Webb is an architect of most of the Epstein files. That's what I honestly think. You watch this girl, and you watch her eyes, and she's reading off of her notes, and then it flashes to the next screen. That's when she's changing the page to her notes. She puts a lot of work into this. She's not an architect.
The beats are crystal clear. On July 2nd.
Also, unlike Whitney Webb, she doesn't make up her own receipts.
In 2025, CBS settles. The $20 billion lawsuit ends up getting settled at $16 million, less than 1% of the asking price, and then Trump brags about these side deals and having ad buys with the company. Then on July 15th, David Ellison meets with Carr at the FCC. On July 17th, Colbert calls the settlement what it is, a big fat bribe. On July 19th, CBS cancels his show. On July 24th, the FCC approves the merger in a party line vote. And the approval came with some strings. A conservative ombudsman installed at CBS, DEI programs dismantled, viewpoint diversity baked into editorial rules. That's right, political concessions written into journalism. And here's where the "it's just business" excuse doesn't really hold water in my book, because in Hollywood, May is when the networks pitch to advertisers in something called the upfronts. If CBS wanted to cancel Colbert for financial reasons, fine. You announce it as a farewell season, you market it as historic and sell ads at a premium to advertisers. But instead, they just blindsided everyone in July and left millions of dollars on the table. Like, that doesn't seem fiscally responsible to me, but what do I know? I'm just someone who always gets laid off in Hollywood. I'm not a businessman. And just like that, the proof of concept was now baked in. So now let's jump to September 17th, 2025, the same playbook with a different target. Jimmy Kimmel hosts Jimmy Kimmel Live on ABC, and ABC is owned by Disney, but Disney doesn't necessarily own every ABC station. I know, welcome to capitalism, it's very confusing. Local companies, which are called affiliates, license the right to air ABC programs. Now, these affiliates can choose to preempt shows, which means they can refuse to broadcast them if they want. Enter Nexstar. Now, Nexstar is the biggest local broadcaster in the U.S., and Nexstar is trying to buy Tegna for $6.2 billion. If approved, that means they would control over 265 stations in the U.S., reaching nearly 80% of U.S. households, and their footprint overlaps almost perfectly with swing states: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona. And for years, this would have been illegal because the FCC rules had capped ownership at 39%. They didn't want you to be able to reach that large of an audience as one conglomerate. But here comes Brendan Carr, who said he is willing to waive or even eliminate that cap. And suddenly, once again, like everything else in this administration, what was once against the law is now up for negotiation. Now that matters because listen to what happened the day that Kimmel got let go. At 1 p.m., Carr goes on to Benny Johnson's podcast and says that ABC affiliates should preempt Kimmel, or there's going to be additional paperwork for the FCC to do before they approve any mergers. At 6:11 p.m., Nexstar, who owns 32 ABC affiliates and wants Tegna's additional 13 more, announced that it is going to preempt Jimmy Kimmel Live for the foreseeable future. And then at 6:30 p.m., Disney suspends Kimmel indefinitely. And then at 7 p.m., Carr thanks Nexstar publicly for doing the right thing. And then minutes later, Sinclair, which owns 31 ABC affiliates, follows suit. Now here's the Larry Ellison connection. It kind of runs twofold, because on one hand, Nexstar systems run on Oracle's infrastructure, cloud storage, ad placement, audience analytics, and Ellison doesn't need to really own the companies in order to intimidate them. He just needs to have them depend on him as the backbone and be scared of the FCC of not approving their merger. Think about this. Nexstar is not just ABC's largest affiliate owner, it's also operating over 49 different CBS affiliates, making it the single largest CBS partner in the country. And now, not even 5 weeks after buying Paramount Pictures, reports are surfacing that the Ellisons are weighing in an all-cash bid for Warner Brothers Discovery. That includes HBO, Warner Brothers Films, DC Comics, and yes, CNN. You're no longer talking about just influence, you're talking about complete media capture. The systems that once watched us and the systems that we watch now converging under one man's control. And we are not at the end of this story yet, unfortunately, my friend, because in part 4B, we're going to be pulling the last 2 threads of this section anyways together. TikTok, the bloodstream of an entire generation, and David Ellison, the proxy who makes his father's empire look like business as usual. So who the F are we working for? Larry Ellison, and he's just getting started. The company that just convinced Congress to ban TikTok is also helping Oracle buy it. Welcome to the largest corporate heist in social media history. This is part 4B of my series, Who the F Am I Working For? The full investigation is available, as always, on my Substack, the Drey Dossier. It's free to subscribe, and you should definitely do so because this rabbit hole goes way deeper than this video could ever get into. While everybody was eagerly watching the TikTok ban drama, Meta was playing a bit of a different game, and Oracle wasn't just swooping in to save the day, they orchestrated the entire thing. Allow me to show you how. In 2024, Meta had spent a whopping $24.4 million lobbying, the most in Meta's history that they've ever spent politically. Most of that was aimed directly at TikTok. They would flood congressional hearings with stories of the dangers of TikTok challenges, right? That many of these kids that were vandalizing schools, assaulting pranks for their teachers, drug experiments, all of that was coming from TikTok, which would be horrible if it were true. But what nobody was reporting on was that when you look a little deeper into this, those challenges didn't actually start on TikTok. Most of them started on Meta platforms. For instance, the Benadryl challenge started in a Facebook group. The Outlet challenge started on Instagram. But Meta's victory successfully had pinned all of them on TikTok, making China not only somebody who held our data, but also started a dangerous ideology that our young people followed. Oh, and get this, while Meta was busy telling Congress about how much TikTok is a Chinese threat to America, they were making $18.4 billion off of Chinese advertisers, which was 11% of their total revenue from the year, allegedly. Oh, and it gets worse because during that same time, whistleblowers had come forward and revealed Project Aldrin, which was Meta's secret plan to give Beijing access to American user data in exchange for market access in China. So Meta was literally trying to hand over American data to China while publicly attacking TikTok for being Chinese-owned and having access to our data. The hypocrisy is breathtaking. And Oracle, while showing up to save the day, did not show up out of nowhere last minute. They'd been running a 3-year con in the meantime. And before I move on to the Oracle of it all, just know that Meta and Oracle are more than just playing on the same team. They are business partners. Oracle's cloud infrastructure powers Meta's AI Llama and provides the data in which to train Llama. So when Meta creates a TikTok panic, they're not just attacking a competitor, they're manufacturing a crisis that benefits their cloud provider. When Meta expands, it gets more data for Oracle, and when Oracle has more data, then Meta has more infrastructure in which to train their AI models on. It's a loop for these two. Okay, so back to Oracle. In 2022, Oracle had launched Project Texas, which meant that they would host TikTok US data while ByteDance kept ownership. Oracle would then become known as the trusted American partner for TikTok, and for those 2 years, Oracle had learned every single detail of TikTok's infrastructure. It was a masterclass in how ByteDance was running their company. They built relationships with regulators. They positioned themselves as the only feasible solution for the US data TikTok problem. But then it got leaked that TikTok still had full access to American data and it wasn't as safe as they thought. So in April of 2024, Congress passes the Divest or Ban law, which meant that Project Texas essentially dies. Now ByteDance has to sell, not just let Oracle babysit the data. But this didn't faze Oracle because Oracle had already done the groundwork. By the time the sale needed to happen, who else was Congress going to approve to buy it? But deadlines kept slipping and negotiations dragged on. And then, in August of 2025, something interesting happened. NVIDIA cut a deal with the Commerce Department to keep shipping their stripped-down AI chips to China. Not their flagship models, but still powerful enough for large-scale AI training. The export control lawyers had since said that this undermined congressional intent. And then barely 3 weeks later, Beijing all of a sudden magically approves TikTok's restructuring after years of absolute refusal. You could say that this is a coincidence. You could say that this is geopolitical deal-making. To me, this looks like a trade, a bit of a quid pro quo. China keeps access to AI silicon and America gets control over TikTok. By September 2025, an Oracle-led consortium acquired about 80% of TikTok's US operations. Allegedly, the board is structured to have 7 seats in total. 6 of them are going to be Americans. 1 is going to be a ByteDance appointee. But here's what gets interesting and what the headlines don't say, is that Oracle isn't just getting 1 seat. Their influence runs much deeper. Silver Lake Partners, which is another major investor, was co-founded by a former Oracle executive. They also helped finance David Ellison's Skydance Media and the acquisition of Paramount Pictures. Andreessen Horowitz, which is another executive who's on the board, they have cloud partnerships with Oracle across all of their portfolio companies. So when you trace all of these connections, then you see that Oracle's network potentially has control over half of the board. I mean, they don't just host TikTok data anymore. They're auditing the algorithm, they're overseeing the content moderation, and they've wielded board-level authority over what 170 million Americans get to see daily. And this is where David Ellison comes in, Larry's son, the perfect proxy. Whenever Larry faces scrutiny, it's usually David that steps forward. It happened with Paramount Pictures. Larry's name disappeared from the filings the day before a major ruling, and David suddenly has all of the voting control. And look at David's record with Skydance. It's a masterclass in bending to power. In 2016, Skydance took a major investment from Tencent, which was a Chinese tech giant, which was later flagged by the Pentagon as being military linked. And that money came with a lot of influence, because, for example, when they made Top Gun Maverick, early cuts of the film had digitally erased the Taiwanese and Japanese flag patches from Tom Cruise's bomber jacket. Can't offend the Beijing censors when you need those sweet box office dollars, and one of those companies is literally investing in the film that you're making. When here's just another beautiful contradiction in this story, because while Skydance was busy sanitizing the American military symbols for China, they were also working hand in hand with the actual Pentagon during this movie. You see, the Navy had provided aircraft carriers, F-18 Super Hornet, script consultation, the whole 9 yards. Because this movie wasn't just about being entertainment, it was also recruitment propaganda that helped the Navy exceed their enlistment goals that year. So David had kind of bent both knees, one for Chinese money and the opposite for Pentagon access. And his hands aren't clean from Israel either, because in 2015, David had directly contacted Israel's defense minister, offering for Skydance to help with any cyber operations against BDS critics. By the way, BDS stands for Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions. It was this international movement that pressured companies around the world and governments to cut ties with Israel over Palestinian rights. So that's not just David taking a political stance with his company, that's him offering corporate resources to help actively counter these critics of Israeli policies. I mean, that's using Hollywood infrastructure for political warfare, potentially. And in part 3, I dove deeper into Larry's operations that run deep into Israel's defense sector, but now that same network is shaping TikTok. Veterans of Unit 8200, which is Israel's elite cyber unit, are now joining TikTok's trust and safety teams. I mean, the new head of the Community Guidelines Department is a former head of the IDF. Like, these two are not separate things. So let me connect a few of these dots for you. Meta manufactured panic while making billions from China. Oracle positioned itself as a patriotic solution through a 3-year con. A suspicious chip deal may have helped smooth Beijing's approval. David Ellison provides perfect proxy cover for his father. And now battlefield information control techniques are shaping civilian social media. This is not good, guys. You may think you're just scrolling social media, but what Larry Ellison sees is you giving him all this behavioral data that helps train these systems to understand how to influence human decision-making at scale. Oh, and by the way, the apple doesn't really fall far from the tree, because David's money also flows into things other than just movies, like in biotech and health data startups like Immunai and C2I Genomics, which are both Israeli-founded companies who use AI to map immune systems and scan genomic code in your body. And speaking of, tomorrow in part 5, we're going to talk about just that. We're going to dig into how the Ellison's machine is shifting from media capture over to healthcare, biotech, and the data that's inside of your body. Because remember what I said in part 3, surveillance infrastructure is not complete without your biological data. It's the most intimate layer, the one that takes control from being an external source to something they can track internally. So yeah, TikTok may have been saved from foreign control, but it's just been absorbed into American surveillance capitalism, and I don't know which one is worse. It is not about the Tylenol. He thinks he is playing us so good by making it about the Tylenol, but it is not about the Tylenol. So we all just heard the big autism announcement, right? And if your head is spinning right now, then don't worry, so is mine. I felt like I was having a stroke the entire time I was listening to it. For nearly an hour and a half, it was the Donald J. Trump and RFK Jr. show starring Tylenol. My God, he would not drop it. He could not let it go. Don't take Tylenol. Tough it out. The Amish don't have autism. Cuba doesn't even have Tylenol. I mean, the whole time I'm thinking to myself, this is so aggressive, and it's misinformation. Almost too aggressive in its misinformation, you know? And sure enough, now every headline across the trades is about acetaminophen, exactly as they planned. But you see, there was one tiny detail that stuck out to me in the middle of that circus, right? In the middle of all of the talks about fevers and toughing it out. And that's when the NIH director got up and calmly announced the recipients of a $50 million autism data science initiative. Well, hold up here, $50 million? Like, that's real money. And while the president dismissed this as the least important part, I believe his exact words were, "Oh, the money, yeah, don't worry about it. We got plenty of that. That's not even the most important part," or whatever he said. But my mind started racing, right? And I started connecting some dots in my head, because if there's one thing that I've learned, it's that whenever this administration spends $50 million on something, it's usually the Department of Defense. And that's it. In fact, the last time they allocated anything close to this amount for healthcare adjacent initiatives was probably back when they signed the big beautiful bill. You remember that one? One where nearly the entire budget was DoD contracts and surveillance infrastructure? Yeah, that big beautiful bill. So when I hear $50 million just materializing for something like autism data platforms, I don't think to myself, oh, how benevolent. I think, what is this really for? Do you remember a few months back when they first had this conversation with us and they first floated this idea? Yeah, do you remember what they called it? An autism registry. And that word has some chilling historical weight to it, like a list for tracking. Everybody and their moms freaked out about it, rightfully so. And so what they walked it back. Suddenly, it wasn't a registry anymore. Now it's just considered a real-world data platform. You see how that works? You see, registry sounds like Big Brother, but a platform sounds like social media. And that's a lot more fun, right? But the fact that they rebranded at all was my first clue that they knew how sinister this would look if we saw it clearly. This next part is crucial because while the president was ranting about pills, the real story was in the details that you had to go to the NIH website.
Another big, chunky, massive part of the reason why I do not deal with NDIS.
To find. This data platform that they're talking about isn't just looking at old medical records, okay? Because when you read what the actual project is, it plans to use data from Medicare and Medicaid claims, old electronic health records, and this is big, consumer wearable devices like smartwatches and Fitbits. And think about that. Why does a public health initiative need the constant real-time biometric data from your Apple Watch? Why does it need to know your heart rate, your sleep patterns, your activity levels for diagnosing autism? Well, here's one potential reason why, because HIPAA, the law that's supposed to protect your medical privacy, has a bit of a loophole to it. It mainly covers your doctors, your hospitals, and your insurers, but the data that you get from a consumer-grade smartwatch, that is often a legal gray area. In fact, it usually falls under consumer data laws. So this platform that they're building is kind of architecturally designed to have a back door for some 24/7 monitoring, if you know what I mean. But why build this autism database now? And this is when it gets interesting, because in April of 2025, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, which is basically the Pentagon's Mad Science Division, announced its new program called MAGIX. And the goal is straight out of a science fiction novel. It's to revolutionize how scientists are able to predict collective human behavior. Why? Because right now, they can't. And they've been admitting it. The MAGIX proposal is a stunning confession of failure. It says that despite all of their big data, their social media scraping, and their fancy AI, that they still are terrible at forecasting how human societies will react to crisis, misinformation, and upheaval. They said some of their biggest headaches are like the reflexivity problem, where humans will change their behavior when they know that they're being watched. The non-ergodic problem, which basically means that human societies aren't static. So an AI trained on last year's data is going to be completely useless for predicting tomorrow's events. The generalization problem, which means that a model that works in one context could catastrophically fail in another, especially if it encounters neurodivergent individuals who do not fit into the standard or normal model. So what's the missing ingredient? Well, they need a more fundamental, richer understanding of human behavior. They need a periodic table of human actions, the basic, stable building blocks that remain consistent in every human form. I found this absolutely groundbreaking paper by Jillian and Nagy called Autism and the Making of Emotion AI, Disability as Resource for Surveillance Capitalism. And I recommend everybody go read this. This will all be in the Drey Dossier on Substack. Go subscribe and follow. And this paper gave me the whole angle because it argued that autism hasn't just been studied in a healthcare sense, but that it's been systemically exploited for rhetorical, conceptual, and material resource for building surveillance technology. And the brutal capitalist logic here is that if you want AI to recognize normal human behavior, you first have to teach it what normal is. The best way oftentimes to define the center is to map out the edges. And then the unique, often more consistent, and less socially masked behavioral data sets of autistic individuals provide a perfect training data set. There's a lot of research that shows that AI systems are being trained on a lot of behavioral markers in autism, such as eye-gazing patterns and facial expressions, motor skills like movement kinematics and stimming, or vocal prosody and communication styles. For AI that's struggling with a reflexivity problem, data from people who may be less likely to alter their behavior when under observation would actually be a goldmine in this instance, because it provides a more stable and predictable baseline. And it won't just be singling them out either, because their data will become this raw material that will help refine these AI tools that will ultimately be used to monitor and sort everyone. And then I started digging around China's scholarly articles, and I found this crazy paper called Psychological and Brain Responses to Artificial Intelligence's Violation of Community Ethics. And this Chinese-led research specifically examined how both autistic and non-autistic brains responded to AI systems that violated moral codes like authority and subversion and loyalty and betrayal. They're literally mapping out neurological signatures of compliance and resistance to authority, and they're using autism data as the key to decode all of it. So yeah, if you ask me, the Tylenol conversation seems like a bit of a distraction. They want everyone focused on how ridiculous they all sound with all their stupid non-medical nonsense. They want you researching whether or not Cuba even has Tylenol. Like, it's a classic misdirection. They want Trump to just say whatever outrageous thing, the first thing that comes to his mind, so that you spend all of your time and energy proving him that he's wrong rather than digging into anything that's actually happening. Meanwhile, I'll say it, Elizabeth Warren is probably one of the few senators who's consistently actually asking the hard questions and pressing the DOD, being like, hey, you guys have a lot of contracts coming in. What are you doing with all of that data? Credit where credit is due. Thank you, Elizabeth Warren. I don't know if it's actually doing anything, but at least she's asking. Meanwhile, every other Democratic congressman, congresswoman, senator, get the F in there and stick some moratoriums on this dual-use health data before it's too late.
It's my honor to welcome three of the world's leading technology CEOs, and in the case of Larry Ellison, it's well beyond technology, sort of CEO of everything. He's an amazing man. And
did Trump just say the quiet part out loud? The CEO of everything, Larry Ellison? See, up until this point, there's been a lot of smoking guns. I've been showing you the pattern for weeks now with the CIA databases, the surveillance infrastructure, the Israel connection, and yet this press conference that was held on January 21st, 2025 is where it all converges. And what was this press conference about? Project Stargate. Before I go into breaking all of this stuff down, this is part of an investigative series that lives primarily...
Alright, because there were so many parts in part 4, A and B and so forth, we're nearly halfway, so I'm going to do this in 4 lots. What do you think so far? Or let me know so we can let her know. Or go over to the Drey Dossier and let her know yourself. She's good.